Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 84, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We're almost to the end of June, and I'm looking forward to a break. This is the week that I leave for Bernina University in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've had a couple of months where it seems like it's been one big event after another. And this is a big event, but it's sewing related, and I am really looking forward to it. There are 6 of us traveling from our local quilt store, and it's a fun group. We've been showing off our quilted jackets. I'm still waiting for the zipper for mine. It's supposed to arrive this week, so I'm planning to get that into my jacket so I can wear it. The more I have that jacket on, the more I like it. And I can definitely see using that pattern again in the future. It was McCall's 8560. It's a current pattern, so if you happen to pick it up, add it to your library because I think it's a really useful pattern whether you're using pre-quilted jacket fabric or you quilt it yourself or you're using something else. It's just a good all-around jacket pattern. I worked a little bit last week on my By Annie Place for Everything tote. I had made the pages, so the way the tote is constructed is it's a zipper tote with pages in the middle that are made using either mesh or vinyl and a lot of zippers. I think 16 zippers if you follow the pattern. After completing the pages, you have to round the corners, which I did, and then bind the outside of each page. And I did that last week. Binding on By Annie patterns seems to be tricky for almost everybody. I made my binding 2.5 inches wide rather than the 2.25 inches wide that was called for in the pattern. And that was mostly because I cut my bias binding on my AccuQuilt cutter. And right now I only have a 2.5 inch wide strip cutter. So I cut the binding at 2.5 inches wide, and I'm glad I did because that extra 1/4 inch gave me a little bit of breathing room. The pages are bound. I'm happy with them. We're moving on to the next step in the process. But before I do that, I'm planning to cut out some woven tops. I have a stack of woven fabrics that I've been collecting over the last year. Some rayon batiks, some other just plain cotton wovens, some cotton lawns, and I've developed a pattern for myself that was kind of Franken patterned from the Cadence top by Love Notions, which fit me extremely well in the upper body. I have really broad shoulders, and that's always a sticking point for me, so when I made that top, I was delighted to find out that it fit me so well in that area. I Franken patterned it with a New Look pattern whose number escapes me. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But it has bust darts that are almost like French darts, and the lower half of that top fit me extremely well. So I took the upper half of the Cadence top and the lower half of the New Look top and mashed them together. And I've got now what I consider to be the perfect woven top for me. My gold standard for well-fitting clothing is when I put it on, if I'm not tugging it or moving it or adjusting it, then I know that it fits me well. And I can put these tops on using this pattern and I don't have to think about them for the rest of the day. I have both a round neck version and a V-neck version, and I'm going to knock out at least one more of those to wear to BU this weekend. I had to laugh because last week I taught the free range slacks class at our local quilt store. That's a Sew House 7 pattern, and it's a fabulous pattern. It's a woven pull-on pant with an elasticized waist. It comes in a wide leg cropped version, which I've also lengthened into a full length version, as well as a more tapered leg version that's on my list of things to make. My two students in that class, one was a fairly experienced garment sewist, and she was able to make the muslin for that pair of pants in class. We just had to make a few small adjustments to it. My other student, who happens to be the daughter of the quilt store owner, the daughter is now the operations manager at the store. She was in my class, and she has a fair bit of quilting experience, but not so much garment making experience. And we also got the pants, the muslin made for her, up to about the point where she has to put the elastic in, which she said she was going to do at home. And she said it was a great pattern for learning techniques. It's got a couple of really cool pocket details, and we're putting it on the schedule to teach again in the fall, so I'm excited about that. But I got dressed to go teach that class, and I had on one of my woven tops that I made, and I paired it with a pair of denim capri pants from Kohl's. Just Lauren Conrad. They fit me really well. They're super high-waisted. I really like high-waisted pants. So I went out into the world in that outfit, and two people said to me, "Oh, did you make your pants?" And I said, "No, but I made my top. Look at my top." So I don't know whether the top looks like it was like I had purchased it at a store. Maybe my sewing skills are really good. And the pants didn't look like that? I don't know. I don't know what prompts questions and comments, but I thought that was kind of funny. I've been keeping an eye on this Joann Fabrics Michaels thing. If you haven't heard, Michaels bought some of Joann Fabrics' intellectual property and brand names like their Big Twist yarn. And Michaels is making a concerted effort to attract former Joann's customers. I keep getting emails in my inbox from Michaels saying, "We're trying to attract Joann's customers. Here's a coupon. Here are the things that are going to be happening. We're expanding our sewing supplies. We're carrying more fabric." I do know that some of the larger Michaels stores that I've been in, like in Seattle, have been carrying fabric for a while. Our Michaels store here in Kalispell is pretty small, and I did pop in there last week just to see what was going on, but they still only have a small sewing area, a small aisle, way in the back corner of the store. So I'm not sure if or how they're going to expand that. The Michaels store in Missoula is much, much larger. So I'm curious to see the next time I go down to Missoula if they have added a fabric section. This doesn't really surprise me. I would imagine that a lot of those large companies, the suppliers, the fabric stores, the yarn manufacturers, are looking for a way to get their products to the consumer and also recoup some of the losses that they took with the Joann's bankruptcy. Sewing Report Live, if you've ever watched that on YouTube, Jen does a fabulous job of researching and ferreting out information, and she's had a couple of videos recently about the fact that some of the corporate officers are being sued individually. Most corporate officers have a shield or some kind of immunity from being sued, but these corporate officers are being sued individually by some of the suppliers who are alleging that those individuals, those corporate officers, misrepresented deliberately Joann's financial health. So I'll have that link in the show notes too if you want to go check out. It's Sewing Report Live on YouTube. I'm not a lawyer or an investigative journalist, so I'm going to refer you to Jen's videos because I think she does a good job of teasing out all of the details. Okay, that's all of the news for this week, so let's jump into this week's podcast topic. I want to talk about leveling up your sewing skills. I'm going to assume that no matter what kind of sewing you do, you don't want to be static. You don't want to stay in the same place. You'd like to advance and accelerate in your sewing skills. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that. So first of all, how do you know when it's time to level up your sewing skills? Maybe you started your quilting journey making really simple quilts out of 5-inch squares and you're starting to get bored. Maybe you thought you'd like to try bag making, so you started with some zipper pouches, and now everybody in your family and everybody on the street and all of your friends have been given zipper pouches as gifts, and you want to move on to something a little bit more challenging. You might be like me. When I got back into sewing, I started with quilts, and when I was a little bit tired of making quilts, I moved over to garment making. So I think you'll know when you're getting bored with your current project, or you see something and you think, I could do that now. And please, 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 I am going to beg of you, do not let anybody tell you that a particular technique is hard. I've said this before. This used to irritate me as a knitting designer when people would say, oh, short rows are hard. Oh, cables are hard. Don't let someone else's fears limit your sewing adventure. Just don't. People used to make buttonholes by hand. I know Laura Ingalls Wilder said that she got really, really good at doing buttonholes because she hated to do them. She was doing them by hand. We have machines. We have machines to do buttonholes. We have machines that have buttonhole feet that hold the button so that the buttonhole foot knows exactly how big to make the buttonhole to fit the button. So while I think it's important to think about what the next level is that you might want to go to and maybe not skip 3 or 4 levels and make things really difficult for yourself, but nothing is hard. So let's talk about some of the ways that you might level up your sewing. And these aren't in any particular order. And they run the whole gamut, whether you are a garment sewist, a quilter, or you want to start making bags, or whatever kind of sewing you want to do. So one of the first and easiest things that you can do is to improve and refine your basic skills. Master that 1/4-inch seam allowance so that you can sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance almost without any guide. When you've been quilting for a while, that does become possible. I call it the eyeball-o-metric method, and it works for me. If you're making garments, even if they're simple garments, master your seam finishes. Before I got a serger, I used to finish my seams by folding under a portion of the seam and sewing it down just on the seam allowance, so that the seam allowance was still free. I wasn't sewing it to the garment, but that basically I was hemming the seam allowance, if you want to think of it that way. Learn how to do a Hong Kong finish. If you don't have a serger, maybe you can borrow one from a friend or pick one up for $50 at a yard sale. I've seen them. And practice finishing your seams using a serger. Are you using the right pressing tools? Are you using a tailor's ham, a sleeve roll? Do you have an iron, and are you using it? And I almost hate to ask that question, but I have seen so many YouTube videos where the content creator is working with a piece of fabric that looks like it had been balled up and stuffed in a bag because it has so many wrinkles in it. You don't need a fancy iron, but learn good ironing and pressing techniques. And ironing and pressing aren't the same thing. So learn good pressing techniques. And that's going to make your garments look professional and not homemade. So take those skills that you've already been using and just make them as great as you possibly can. Along with that, maybe now it's time for you to improve the tools that you're using. It might be something as simple as changing your rotary cutter blades more often, or spending a little bit more money on a higher quality blade that you don't have to change as often. Of course, the one tool that immediately comes to mind when you think about improving your tools or getting new ones is to get a new sewing machine. And if you have the budget for it and that's something that you want to do, then by all means, go ahead. I got a new sewing machine about 6 or 8 months ago. I went from a Janome 6600P to a Bernina 880. The Janome I bought in 2013, and it was a phenomenal machine when I was quilting. It did everything that I needed it to do, but it really didn't like sewing knits. And I don't think that was operator error, because I know enough about sewing to know what needles to use, what stitches to use. For some reason, that machine just didn't like sewing knits. And when I got that 880, I could do things on the 880 that the 6600 always balked at. Some machines just seem to be better at certain tasks than others. Before you jump in and get a new sewing machine, though, I'd encourage you, do as much as you possibly can on the machine that you've already got. Maybe what you need is a new presser foot. Maybe a presser foot will allow you to do some of the things that you're struggling with. The cost of ownership of my Bernina 880 is certainly a bit more than it was with the 6600, because Bernina has such a great selection of specialty presser feet, and I have a lot of them. Other tools that might let you work more efficiently and accurately would be a new pair of scissors or a cutting mat or even a new cutting table. Learn more about the thread and the needles that you're using. I will put a link to the podcast episode that I did on thread. I also did a podcast episode on needles, and it might be time to revisit both of those topics. For my Bernina University jacket, I was making some very tiny 3-inch finished sawtooth star blocks, and within those sawtooth star blocks, I had flying geese units that were 1 inch finished width. And in order to do that small a block accurately, I switched to 80 weight Deco Bob thread on the top and in the bobbin, and I paired that with a size 7511 Microtex needle. And it was much, much easier to sew and press those blocks than if I had been using a heavier thread and a larger needle. So think about that when you're working on your projects. The next way to level up your sewing practice is to sew with more challenging fabrics. So let's say that you are making garments, and thus far you have made a lot of garments out of cottons or maybe linens, very stable woven fabrics. Maybe now it's time to try sewing with knits, or try a silky drapey fabric like a silk charmeuse. If you're a bag maker or an aspiring bag maker, and so far you've been making zipper pouches out of quilting cotton, maybe now it's time to try vinyl or waxed canvas. And you can go in baby steps. You don't have to leap from a zipper pouch to a full-blown tote bag. You can make a zipper pouch out of vinyl. You can make a zipper pouch out of waxed canvas. You're taking incremental steps, but you're increasing your skills at the same time. If you don't know a lot about fabrics and you're not sure what you might want to try next, I have a couple of suggestions. I would get a copy of Sandra Betzina's book, Fabric Savvy. She goes through all the different kinds of fabrics and talks about what are the best presser feet, what are the best needles, what are the best techniques for sewing with that fabric, some pitfalls you might want to avoid. I'd like to think that one of the things that makes my younger daughter so good at her job as a buyer for Nordstrom is that when she was in high school and college, I used to drag her to Joann Fabrics with me, and we would walk around the store and I would point out the different fabrics. This is a twill. This is a charmeuse. This is a flannel. This is whatever. So you can always go to a fabric store and look at fabrics, touch them, feel them, read the information on the bolt. Try to guess the fiber content. Make it a game. For you garment makers out there, let's say you want to level up your fitting skills. Maybe you started by making simple boxy garments, which is fine, but those types of garments aren't necessarily flattering to every body. And if you're going to put the time and effort into sewing clothing for yourself, learn what your figure features are. Learn what you need to either emphasize or de-emphasize. And one of the things I haven't mentioned, but it's applicable to every single area almost, is to take classes. That's going to help you level up your sewing skill. Garment fitting is probably the one area where I've taken the greatest number of classes because that has been the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around. I've taken classes with Kenneth King. I've taken classes with Joe Vecchiarelli at Sew Expo. It's worth it to seek out those people if that's something that you like to do. There are plenty of great tutorials on YouTube that you can watch and learn at home. And I don't think that anything substitutes for practice. So go to Goodwill, buy a bunch of old sheets, cut them up, practice, practice, practice. When you find something that fits you well, maybe you can learn to hack it. Change that pattern from a round neck to a V-neck. Lengthen a top into a dress. Instead of making a pair of elastic waist pull-on pants, make something a little bit more refined, maybe with a side zipper and some darts. For me, I find it really motivating when I'm able to, Franken pattern one pattern with another one and come up with a top that fits me so well that I don't even know I'm wearing it. You can make the most technically challenging, beautifully constructed, perfectly finished garment, but if it doesn't fit your body, all that work is almost for nothing. This next one is a bit nebulous and hard to maybe get a hold of, but you can definitely improve your sewing skills simply by learning what your personal aesthetic is. What is your favorite style? If you're a quilter, do you like traditional? Do you like modern? Do you like paper piecing? Do you like improv? When you identify your personal style, that's going to inform a lot of the other choices that you make. I don't generally gravitate toward modern quilt designs or modern fabric lines, but this past week, because I will be teaching a Learn to Sew pillowcase class at the quilt store at the end of July, Ashley, the young woman who was in the pants class, who is the operations manager at the quilt store, selected some fabric from a new line by Emily Van Hoff called Groove for Moda Fabrics. It's a very bold, very graphic, solid colors line of fabric, and it's not anything that I necessarily would have chosen, but Ashley picked it out and combined it with a couple of other fabrics, and I made 2 pillowcases using that fabric line, and I have to tell you, they turned out really well. I'm in love with them. I don't see them in my own house, but they would fit perfectly in my daughter's decor. So while it's important to identify what you do like and what you don't like, be prepared to branch out a little bit. But again, once you've identified what your personal aesthetic is, that's going to help you considerably. I don't sew trendy garments. I'm not in a season of my life where that kind of clothing is appropriate for me. I don't have anywhere to wear it. But I might be willing to incorporate some design details from trendy outfits into some of my own sewing, so maybe a neckline detail or a hem finish. But knowing your own personal style and your own personal aesthetic will help keep you from chasing after everything that comes down the pike. When I start a sewing project, I usually ask myself, will this fit my lifestyle? Do I have a use for it? It doesn't keep me from making things. I might make something with the intention of giving it to someone because I know that person will either wear it or use it. But I try to be pretty selective now about what I sew. Some people use the rule, does it go with 3 other outfits in my closet? That's a great way to do it. Okay, you can get your fellow sewists and the wider sewing community to help you level up your sewing skills and keep you accountable. Maybe you want to join a sewing challenge like Me Made May, or you find a challenge on Instagram that will help you learn some new techniques and give you an opportunity to show off what you've learned. If your local quilt store offers an open sew time, take advantage of it, especially if they have an instructor on staff who's willing to help people with their projects. Maybe you want to join a guild like a local quilt guild or the American Sewing Guild. At the very least, maybe you can find a sewing buddy and the two of you can be accountable to each other. So my friend Tara and I used to take classes together just so we could be inspired by what we were each working on. This last idea isn't for everybody, but it certainly will level up your sewing skills in a hurry. And that's if you become a teacher, or you start to create YouTube tutorials or tutorials on your website. I think back to an interview I heard with Liz Porter and Marianne Fonz about them starting their teaching careers in quilting. You might remember the show Fonz and Porter's Love of Quilting on PBS. And they said that when they first started, the quilt store would say, "We'd like you to teach this technique next week." And the two of them would go home and they would spend the whole week learning that technique so that they could teach it at the store. And I will confess, I have done that too. My biology professor in college used to say, "You only need to stay one page ahead of the students." And nothing will cement your understanding faster than teaching it to someone else. You don't have to be an expert. You can be a beginner. All you need to know is more than the person that you're teaching. And if you run into something, maybe you learn it together. And just a quick personal note, I titled this podcast episode Good, Better, Best. I had a second grade teacher when we were learning cursive writing in elementary school, and she used to say, "Good, better, best, never let it rest, till your good is better and your better best." And obviously that has stayed with me for over 50 years. So I would encourage you to do everything you can while you're sewing to improve your skills, improve your knowledge base, and make your sewing the best that it can be. This is a gift to yourself. I love feedback. I love the notes and the comments. Several of you have started following my blog, so welcome to the blog. There is a link to my blog at my website, www.janetzabo.com, and that's where you can see photos of my sewing projects as well as pictures of cute little furry animals, plants in my garden. We have a grizzly bear roaming the neighborhood right now. It took out my neighbor's chickens. So I'm very careful when I walk out to the garden, and you probably won't see a picture of a grizzly bear on my blog unless it's from far away. You can also provide feedback through the fan mail feature. You can leave a comment on the show notes page, and that's at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. I will tell you that there probably isn't going to be a podcast next week because I'm going to be at Bernina University and then traveling in Seattle with some friends of mine. But I will have a recap of our trip to Bernina University and maybe some commentary from some of my fellow travelers. So until next time, I hope you have a great couple of weeks and that you get to go sew something.